What are the different types of psalms, and how do they relate to the life of a Christian?
Paul, as we begin this discussion of the different types of psalms, I want to reiterate that the overarching themes of the Psalter would be God's gift of Torah and His promise of the Messiah. But underneath these broad categories would be some subcategories that help us get a better handle on the Psalter. And we want to explore now several different types of psalms, with the first one being a psalm of complaints or a psalm of laments. Many psalms simply laments the attitudes, the circumstances, the enemies that are surrounding the psalmist. One of them would be Psalm 13, which is characteristic of this type of psalm. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts every day and have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? We looked at Psalm 137 in an earlier discussion. There by the rivers of Babylon we sat and wept when we remembered Zion. Many psalms are simply psalms of complaint or laments. They simply pour out their hearts to God and ask Him to intervene. Make haste, O God. Rise up, O God. Do not delay, O God. These are the prayers in this type of psalm where the pathos and the suffering reaches very high levels at times. The second type of psalm would be a psalm of celebration. Perhaps my favorite psalm of celebration is Psalm 30. And this talks in these terms. I will exalt you, O Lord, for you lifted me out of the depths and did not let my enemies gloat over me. Verse 2, O Lord my God, I called to you for help, and you healed me. O Lord, you brought me up from the grave. You spared me from going down into the pit. Sing to the Lord, you saints of Him. Praise His holy name. For His anger lasts only a moment, but His favor a lifetime. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. You turned my wailing into dancing. You removed my sackcloth and clothed me with joy, that my heart may sing to you and not be silent. O Lord my God, I will give you thanks forever. You can see that this psalm of celebration in Psalm 30 is much like Psalm 100. Enter His gates with thanksgiving and His courts with praise, says Psalm 100. These are psalms where the psalmists celebrate the fact that God has heard the cry of laments. He's heard the desperate cry of the sufferer. And then they give thanks to God. You see, weeping endures for a night, but joy comes in the morning. And these psalms celebrate God's faithfulness. So psalms of lament, psalms of celebration. Then there are the so-called penitential psalms, where the prayer is petitioning God for forgiveness upon the confession of sins. You may remember we've already looked at Psalm 51 several times, where David prays a penitential psalm after his adulterous relationship with Bathsheba. But another penitential psalm would be Psalm 32. Verse 3 is a good place to pick it up. When I kept silent, my bones wasted away through my groaning all day long. For day and night your hand was heavy upon me. My strength was sapped, as in the heat of summer. Then I acknowledged my sin to you, and did not cover up my iniquity. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave the guilt of my sin. Paul, part of your question was not only what kind of psalms are there, but how can I use them as a pastor and in my life as a Christian. Paul, I found so often in my ministry to people in nursing homes, to shut-ins, people in hospitals, that more often than not, I would be pulling out my pocket Bible that was not just the New Testament and Psalms and Proverbs, but the whole canon, as you could probably guess by now. But I'd pull out my entire Bible. More often than not, I would turn to a psalm and read that and pray that with people and share the lament and the suffering when there would be a stillborn or a sudden death. Share the lament psalms with an aged saint whose body is dying and wasting away. Share songs of praise and celebration at the birth of a new child or at the recovery after surgery. Share psalms of penitence when people would come into my office and grieve over past sins and past mistakes. You see, the Psalter is a great tool for the pastor. And I would just say parenthetically at this point that the greatest Christian leaders in the history of the church have told us as pastors to pray the Psalter on a regular basis. Augustine said that. Ambrose said that. Luther said that. It was his favorite Old Testament book. Calvin said that. John Knox said that. Dietrich Bonhoeffer said that. Someone told me that about 12 years ago because I was in the habit as a pastor in my devotional life reading a section from the Old Testament and reading a section of the New Testament. A half hour in each testament, once a day, 5 days a week. But then I heard that the greatest Christians encouraged pastors especially to read the Psalter on a regular basis. And so I began doing that about 12 years ago. I still read the Bible an hour a day, 5 days a week. But I go 20 minutes in the Old Testament, 20 minutes in the Psalter, and 20 minutes in the New Testament. And that has made such a difference in my life as a pastor and professor to read the prayers of the Psalter. Because then, as I said, when we're dealing with people in their celebration or in their brokenness, in their sinfulness or in their need, we know the Psalter. We have prayed these prayers time after time after time. I have found that I go through the Psalter now at least 3 times a year in my own devotions, so that it not only builds me up in my own prayer life and my understanding of Torah and Messiah, but also it gives me a timely word to minister to people in their height of joy or in their depths of depression. So penitential psalms can be very powerful to pray and share with people. But there's another type of psalm. It's called a Zion psalm. There's only several of these, Psalm 46 and Psalm 48 specifically. But they celebrate God's gift and promise to Mount Zion. Mount Zion in Psalm 132, we're told, which is another Davidic Zion psalm, that just as God chose David in 2 Samuel 7 and made eternal promises to him, so in that same choice God chose Mount Zion. The two go hand in glove in the book of Isaiah and certainly in Zion Psalms. I would say at this point that there is much Zion talk in Psalms 46, 48, 132, but also there's Zion talk in Isaiah, Jeremiah, the book of Lamentations. And we would want to notice a very, very important verse in Hebrews 12, verse 22, that connects the church with Mount Zion. The Hebrew writer says in contrast to coming to Mount Sinai, but you have come to Mount Zion. You have come to the church of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem. You have come to myriad upon myriad of angels. You have come to a mediator whose blood speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. Indeed, you have come to Jesus. This is the only verse in the New Testament that connects Zion of the Old Testament with the church of the New Testament. So important in applying specifically Zion psalms to the church you serve. Because the everlasting covenant God made with Mount Zion is now the covenant God has made with His church. And this is what Jesus means in Matthew 16. The gates of hell will not prevail against the confession that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, His church. Zion Psalms, connected again as a pastor and Christian to the church. There's also Psalms of Ascent. Psalms 120 through 134 simply are composed for people in their pilgrimage as they go to Jerusalem 3 times a year, according to Deuteronomy chapter 16. And these are the songs that they sang, the songs of ascent, because wherever you are in Israel, if you're going to Jerusalem, you're going up. It's over 3,000 feet above sea level. And these are the Psalms of Ascent, celebrating the worship and life of the community that gathers around God's presence at His temple in Jerusalem. Now, to conclude this section, I would want to accent one of the greatest psalms in the Psalter. And this is Martin Luther's favorite psalm, Psalm 118. And this is Luther's favorite part of the psalm. It begins this way in verse 1. Give thanks to the Lord, for He is good. His love endures forever. But then the psalmist goes down to verse 17. I will not die but live and will proclaim what the Lord has done. This is Luther's favorite verse in the Psalter. What a fantastic promise. I will not die but live and will proclaim what the Lord has done. And then it goes on with a huge messianic theme. Verse 22 in Psalm 118. The stone the builders rejected has become the capstone. The Lord has done this, and it's marvelous in our eyes. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. The day that we rejoice in, indeed the day that we are glad in, is Resurrection Day. Because that is the day that the stone the builders rejected became the cornerstone. Luther loved the entire Psalter. He encouraged pastors to pray the Psalter. He claimed the promise, I will not die but live and proclaim the works of the Lord. I would hope, Paul, that this way too brief discussion on the different kinds of psalms would encourage you and inspire you in your own pastoral vocation to look at the Psalter as your gymnasium. That's what St. Ambrose said, where you get your workout and you stay spiritually fit as a Christian pastor to pray the Psalms, to meditate on the Psalms, and to not only take them in, but also to let them out in ministry to people.